Have you ever left a voicemail for someone that's like 4 minutes long because you didn't know how to wrap it up? Or have you ever received a voicemail from someone that's like 4 minutes long and they didn't make their point until like the last 4 seconds? Summary skills. These are summary skills, and the world needs more people with summary skills. Hi, I'm Katie Azevedo from SchoolHabits.com. I'm a private executive function coach who teaches students and professionals strategies to learn and work better. Please consider liking and subscribing if you want to and if you enjoyed this video, because that makes a world of difference. And if you want more tips and tricks for studying and learning and productivity and all that type of stuff, then follow me over on Instagram. Are you ready? Let's do this. This video is all about summarizing text. I give you a ton of strategies and I walk you through a very specific example at the end. So the ability to summarize text is a foundational skill to so many other school habits, right? Like taking notes, annotating, writing essays, writing reports, giving presentations, and studying. If you can't summarize, then all of these other skills and things that are required of you is gonna be so much harder. So there are a lot of misconceptions about what summaries are. So I'm gonna start with an important distinction between what a summary is and what it is not. A summary is a general description of the main idea of the text. A summary is not a shortened version of the text, a paraphrase of the text, or a play-by-play account of plot points. Next, let's go over what belongs in a summary and what does not belong in a summary. So the following 6 items belong in a summary. Number 1, the main topic or the main theme of the text. This would be a broad idea like racism or identity or political conflict, like the broad term. Number 2, the purpose of the text, like what does the author want you to know? Why are they writing it? Number 3, a general, that's the key word, overview of the plot, if there is a plot. Number 4, names of key people. They have to be key and only like 1 or 2. It's not all the characters. And you only include them if they're connected to the main idea. Number 5, important dates, but again, only a few and only if they're connected to the main idea. And number 6, usually the author and the title of the text, or if it came from like an academic journal or something like that, you would include that. Okay, 7 things that do not belong in a summary. Number 1, small details. Number 2, descriptive, flowery, and figurative language. Number 3, information that's interesting to you, but not central to the main idea. Number 4, names and dates, unless they are connected to the central theme. Number 5, your opinions or your assumptions, leave them out. Number 6, exact language and exact quotations from the text. And number 7, a play-by-play of plot points. That's a hard one to say. All right, so that's what belongs in a summary, what doesn't. What is a summary and what is not a summary. So obviously the whole point of this video is how to write one, so we are getting into that now. Now the strategy I'm gonna outline has 6 steps. Also, you should know this entire video, a transcript of it in a form of a blog post, is available, like all of my videos, on SchoolHabits.com. Okay, so how to write a summary. Step 1, read small chunks of text at a time. Now, whether you are reading an article, a passage, a book, a textbook, I suggest reading 1 to 3 paragraphs, something like that, of text at a time. It would also depend on the difficulty level of the text. The thicker, more challenging the text, the shorter amounts of it you would read before stopping. Working with small batches of material is best for comprehension. And of course, you can't write a summary if you don't comprehend what we read, right? Step 2, highlight and rewrite. Now, of course, I have an entire video called the Highlight and Rewrite Annotation Strategy for this strategy that I will leave in the description box. I'll give the gist of it here. Okay, so while you are reading your chunk of text, okay, a couple paragraphs, I want you to highlight information as you go. You can underline it if you don't feel like highlighting it, like whatever. Now, I know from my students, working with like literally over 3,000 of them, the most common feedback I get or pain point is like, well, I don't know what to highlight. So I do go over that type of stuff in the highlight and rewrite video, but I'm gonna give a couple tips here too for what to highlight in just a second. You highlight things that you think are important, okay? And you might get it right, you might get it wrong. It's a, learn as you go process. And then you write a brief little note to yourself in the margin connected to that highlight. Like, did you highlight the theme, then write theme? Did you highlight an important person, then write important person? Did you highlight like a key turning event, then write key event in the margins? Okay, but you have to write a reason why you highlighted. Okay, that's very important. So as promised, here are some tips to figuring out what you should highlight in the first place. So here's a tip. Main ideas of text are usually stated in the first couple sentences and often repeated at the end. So for each paragraph that you're reading, usually the main idea, the topic sentence is the first 1 or 2 sentences, and they repeat it or a version of it in the conclusion. Okay, so if you're looking for the main idea of what you're reading, check those places. Now, middle text often contains examples, vocabulary words. If you think you've read a critical vocabulary word that's essential eventually for the summary that you're going to be writing, then highlight the vocab word. If there's nothing super important there, then you don't have to highlight it. And the third little tip is that usually like 1 to 3 highlights per section of text that you're reading is enough. Any more than that, and you probably need to work on your highlighting strategy. Number 3, make sure you understand the text. Writing a summary is impossible if you don't understand what you read. Really, actually, like let that settle for a minute. Honestly, if you're reading something really challenging, like that's the level that your classes are at, you might actually spend more time like understanding the text than you spend writing your summary. And that's just facts. That's just like what it is, right? Some text is really hard to understand and it takes us a minute. We just can't fight that. That's just what it is. So make sure that you read carefully and then you understand what you're reading. Here are some tips for comprehension to make sure that you get the most out of what you're reading. Number 1, notice when something is unclear to you. Like let something click in your head that's like, ooh, I read that and that just, right? And stop. Number 2, definitely stop reading if you zone out. Sometimes when we zone out, when we're reading, we're like, oh, I'll just keep going and I'll like pick it up in a minute. No, you won't. Like the train left the station. Like the minute you zoned out, recognize it. That's a superpower. And then just stop. Go back 1 or 2 sentences. If there's a word that you don't understand, look it up. Like put the effort in. Number 3, when you finish reading your chunk of text, you want to ask yourself how much you actually understood. 10 out of 10 isn't necessary to write a summary. 10 out of 10 isn't necessary for good reading comprehension. I say like somewhere at 7 out of 10. If you read a chunk of text, you're like, yeah, I'm like 70%, then you're good to keep going. Okay, so step 4 is to, from your memory, you're gonna try to summarize the author's main argument without looking at the text, okay? It's only 1 or 2, maybe 3 paragraphs max. I think you'll be all right. In the margins, you're gonna have your notes that you wrote next to your highlights. Is usually just like 1 or 2 words. But somewhere on the other margin, under the paragraphs, maybe in a separate notebook, a 1 to 2 sentence summary of that 1 to 2 or 3 paragraphs that you just read. Write the summary in the margins, like I said. Don't use the author's exact words, and you shouldn't anyway because you're not looking at the text. Use simple language as if you're talking to a young child. And if you can't recall exact names and dates, leave them out of your summary. Don't go back and check the text, okay? If you're confused up to the 4 steps at this point, then like scroll back and rewatch, okay? Because if the next few steps aren't gonna make too much sense if you're confused at this point. All right, so step 5, we need to match our summary to the highlights. So after you've written your summary, you're gonna go back and see, and this is when you can look at the text. You're gonna go back and see if the summary that you wrote matches the majority of the information that you had written in the margins or that you highlighted. You're good to go if your summary includes most of the things that you highlighted. If not, if there's something that you highlighted that didn't end up in your summary, consider adding it to your summary. Maybe not, because chances are you like over highlighted, right? And it doesn't belong in your summary, but this is your chance to think about that. Okay, so once you've completed step 5, you repeat steps 1 through 5 until you're done reading your text. So again, you read a small chunk at a time, you highlight as you go, You write a brief note to yourself in the margin that's connected to your highlights, and then you try to write a 1 to 2 sentence summary of that small chunk of text. That's steps 1 through 5. And you repeat that till the end of your text. Now, when you've completed reading all of your text, and you have small 1 to 2 sentence summaries of each of those chunks of text, we're moving on to step 6, which is to combine all of your small summaries. This is going to become your big summary. And this is the final step, and this is where your summary comes together. If the text you're reading is longer than a paragraph, you're clearly going to have multiple little summaries statements written in the margins or written on your paper somewhere. So in order to produce a single summary for the entire text, you're going to need to combine those smaller summaries that you wrote along the way. And here is how to do that. I want you to go through and read your smaller summaries in the order that you wrote them, just from top to bottom, just read them through. Next, just like we did in step 5, I want you to attempt to recreate those summaries without looking at the text. See, the reason we do this without looking at the text is that it kind of distills all that extra detail-y information from the final product, which is what we want. A summary is not supposed to have all that little detail-y information. So by not looking at the text, it's actually a hack. Oh, not like a hack, that sounds cheap, but like it's a really good strategy for separating extra detail-y stuff from the meat and the nuggets of what goes into a summary. Step 3, I really suggest you do this on paper and not in your head, because chances are your final summary is going to need to be like on paper, digitally too, that's fine, but just don't keep it up here. Step 4, when you are done, check to see if your big summary contains most of the information that you had written in your smaller summaries. If there's something from your smaller summaries that you completely forgot about and you really think you need to add it into your bigger summary, do that. And then step 5, or it's not really a step, but it's just a tip, your final summary should probably include who, what, when, where, how, and why, depending on your text. Like any skill, learning how to write a summary takes practice. You can really mess it up a few times as you learn it, totally fine. You'll get better as you go. Just remember, a summary should take like a 10,000 foot view, not a 1,000 foot view. So next, I'm going to walk you through an example of how I would personally write a summary of a piece of text. Okay, so to demonstrate the strategies that I just walked you through, I'm going to use a short story here called The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. It's written about 100 years ago. You don't need to know this story in order for this strategy and this example to make sense. If you do want to know the story before we begin, then you can pause the video and Google it. It's only about 2 pages long, but I'm going to walk you through the strategies that I just taught you. We are not going to read this short story together. I'm going to speed this up so it goes a little quicker. Strategy number 1, remember, is to read a small chunk of information at a time. I'm going to take about 2 paragraphs here. I might change it up as I go. We will see. I'm going to highlight some important information as I read. So I have a character's name. Obviously, I'd actually read this and not talk about it, right? But I'm trying to give you an example. A woman, she finds out that her husband dies. There has been a railroad disaster. That's how he died. His name is Brentley, and his name is on the list of people who are killed. Okay. So now remember, without looking at the text, I am going to write a short summary in the margins. That's going to be husband killed in accident. Okay. Now remember, we're not going to read this together. I'm going to speed this up pretty quickly so that you can just see about how many highlights I'm doing per paragraph, in addition to the types of summary notes that I'm writing in the margins. So we will continue. I'm going to read these paragraphs together. I'm going to read, she finds out about her husband's death. She's, whoops, that's the eraser. She gets really sad. She's crying. So I'm going to say hard grief. And again, remember, we would be reading this, but I'm choosing not to do that with you now. All right, so I'm going to read that together. From this point forward, I'm going to go pretty quickly, and I just want you to follow along. I'm not going to have any voiceover, okay? Okay, so I know that was pretty quickly, but the whole goal of this was for you to see how I read a chunk at a time. I highlighted important information as I went, and then without looking at the text, I wrote some very small marginal notes. You can see them here, nothing more than a couple words. I also, along the way, made sure that I was understanding what I was reading, because remember, we can't summarize what we don't understand, right? So I did self-check along the way, and you're going to need to make sure you do that as well. The next step is that we want to combine all these short marginal summaries into our larger summary. That's the whole point, right? And so the way we do that is we read our summaries from top to bottom. Again, I'm not reading the text, I'm just reading the summary itself. Okay, so there's this woman, Mrs. Mallard. Her husband is killed in an accident. She has a lot of hard grief from that. Then I noticed that there is some language of new life, a lot of references to spring and rain and sparrows and singing like that. So I wrote language of new life in the margin. Then I noticed there was an emotional shift. So that's all that I wrote there. So actually what happens in the story is she finds out her husband is dead. She goes into a room, she starts crying, and then actually she stops crying all of a sudden as she has this realization that life could actually be pretty good without her husband, and she can be free from him. Remember, this is written 100 years ago where marriage was super limiting for women. I put joy, relaxation, realization in the margins, and then freedom, because she realizes that her new life is going to be very free. The next couple paragraphs, freedom from marriage restrictions, I put that. And then the last, let's see, dreaming of a full and free future without a husband. So this is, she's sitting in the room quietly, being filled with joy about this idea of a new life. But then plot twist, her husband actually returns alive. He actually wasn't anywhere near the accident. It was misinformation. And right when she sees her husband standing in the house, she actually dies. She drops dead. And I wrote at the bottom here, she dies of the realization that she has to return to marriage. So if I were to put all those short summaries together, it would sound something like this. Now I'm actually going to put it up on the screen. I'm not going to write it because that would take too long. In The Story of an Hour, Kate Chopin explores the limitations that marriage imposes on women in the 19th century. So notice right there, I stated the overall theme, also the time period, the name of the story, and the author. In the story, Louise Mallard learns of her husband's accidental death, and after an initial moment of grief, she experiences joy at the idea of her future freedom and independence. So that right there are a few marginal summaries combined, right? So let's look back at the screen. She has grief, and then emotional shift to joy and realization of freedom, right? Next, when her husband surprisingly returns alive, Louise instantly dies from the grief of losing the free life she had only momentarily imagined for herself. So that is a very gist summary, pretty much covers who, what, when, where, how, and why, and it includes the overall theme. But you don't learn all the microscopic plot details. I didn't even give her husband's name, right? Most of that was written from memory, okay? That's the whole idea. Hopefully this helps. So we have reached the end of this video. I hope you found it helpful or motivating. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you want to. And truly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for watching.